Hello and welcome to Reporters, the magazine that brings you some of our best stories from our correspondents around the world. Well, this week we take you to Niger. The West African nation is one of the poorest in the world. President Mamadou Tandja has led the country for 10 years. Well, he was due to step down this year, but he doesn't want to. In fact, Tandja is making sure he stays in power with a key referendum, giving him the green light to rule for a third term. Well, the opposition are furious and they're crying foul. Our reporters, Melissa Bell and Eric José, travelled to Niger to bring us this special report.
President Tandja's time is running out, so he's asked the people of Niger to vote yes in a referendum that would give him more time and more power. So far, nothing's been allowed to stand in his way. The highest court's been dissolved, so too the parliament, both opposed to his plan for a new constitution. Beneath the flags, all that remains is a hot, empty building, a stuffy memorial to 10 years of stable democracy. Its former vice president says that even before the referendum, the harm's already been done.
There's been a coup d'état of which the institutions have been the victims. A coup d'état that may not have been military, but that took place nonetheless, that's for sure. But the people of Niger are going to fight. We can't accept that it's the end of democracy. It's just not possible.
But the mutterings of the last few months have been drowned out by the referendum campaign. These supporters of President Tandja are celebrating Tezarche, or continuity in Hausa, a chance for the president to carry on the referendum nothing more than his answer to an expectant population. A population so eager that this rally, we were told, was funded entirely with private money. A final call for a massive turnout.
Democracy is not in danger. You have to understand one thing. This referendum represents the will of the people. The result of the referendum is going to allow the president to carry on. And the referendum, the will of the people, stands above any kind of constitution. There can't be locks between the people and the decision that the people want to make.
Same place the next day, and the opposition is also trying to make itself heard. Its message that the referendum is illegal and a boycott the only answer. A boycott supported by former allies of the president's, including 7 ministers who resigned in May.
What made us resign was the president's determination to hold this referendum in violation of the constitution of our republic.
They've joined ranks with Mahamadou Issoufou, who stood against President Tandja in the last 2 elections, something he fears he may never have the opportunity to do again.
This project for a referendum on the new constitution is an anti-party project. It's a project that's anti-democratic, and it will pave the way for President Tandja to install a dynasty. This referendum, if it pleases God, will fail.
At stake, the fruits of 10 years of stable democracy. Radio-Télévision Ténéré was the first, but is now one of many. No fewer than 4 television and 26 radio stations now broadcast independently out of Niger. So far, speech here has been remarkably free and varied.
Allez, Star Match, nous sommes ensemble, bien sûr, jusqu'à 15h. On est chez vous, 20 73 514. Le 20 73.
But new care is being taken now, and broadcasts are closely watched. The industry's regulator has been given sweeping new powers by President Tandja. Channels can now be shut down for any broadcasts that displease the authorities. Caution is now the order of the day.
You can no longer say anything bad. Right now, they need public opinion on their side. So you can't share what's wrong with the government. You would be accused of being involved in a counter-campaign, of being with the opposition when in fact it's your duty to say yes. There are things that are good, but there are also things that need fixing.
Among those who've spoken out most freely over the last few weeks have been the country's print journalists. Today, they're paying the price. Several have been called in by the police. Their crime, a series of articles alleging that President Tandja's son took kickbacks to help secure mining contracts.
This is a dictatorship and nothing else.
The referendum's now just 3 days away. Crisis talks are held over a beer as those summoned work out how to respond. But even more than the next few hours, what really worries them is what will happen after the referendum.
They could even create a state of siege.
But for now, they're determined to carry on telling it like it is.
Tazarche, or continuity, is nothing less than a con designed to hide the regime's corruption, serious corruption.
All these journalists have already spent time in jail simply for doing their job. They decide to go to the police station together rather than wait for the arrest. After several hours of interrogation, they're set free for the time being. A day to go before the referendum, in the Yantale district of Niamey, voting cards are being sorted. And here, democracy matters. Lists of electors are printed and displayed, schools turned into polling stations as the people of Niger prepare to vote yes or no, giving their stamp or not to the president's plans.
Tomorrow we're expecting a lot of people. Many people are registered and they are keen to come and vote.
A day to go before the referendum and the army's on the street. Slowly but surely, the sand-colored courtyard fills with men and women in uniform. The men and women of Niger's Republican Guard. The sergeant major gives the order to fall in line and the troops are ready for inspection.
Of course I'm proud of them. As you can see, morale is good. They're well turned out, ready to accomplish their mission.
And rank here matters, so the brass votes first. Colonel Assouman leads where his troops will follow, to the ballot box. Many here in Yantala voting station number 40 are queuing to vote yes to the wishes of a former colonel, Mamadou Tandja. And they're voting early because the opposition is threatening to disrupt the poll. No chances are being taken. Their votes cast, the soldiers head back to the barracks, from where they'll redeploy tomorrow to keep the peace. D-Day, and even Niamey's little market is silent. All around, the city's streets have been closed off. Nothing's been left to chance. And all for this. President Tandja is coming to vote for a new constitution that will give him so much more than just time. As he arrives at polling station 001, he's greeted by those ministers who've stayed loyal. A political establishment gathered around to give the president even more of what he already has in spades, power. Mamadou Tandja already rules entirely by presidential decree, but under the new constitution he will become not only head of state, but the head of the government, the head of the army, and the head of the magistrates. He'll also be able to stand as often as he likes. And with today's vote, Mamadou Tandja automatically becomes president for 3 more years.
I'm very satisfied, because of course, it was not easy to get everything organized to get here, to D-Day. And now I've voted myself. So everyone is very satisfied. I've lived up to my responsibilities as a president of the Republic towards the demands of the people of Niger.
And where the president has led, the political elite follows. Polling station 001 is reserved for the country's dignitaries and their families. The very heart of the regime, the most privileged, voting for continuity, all in indelible ink. 5 kilometers and another world away, Kouarategi's only building, its school, has become a polling station. The lessons still on the board as Niger's underprivileged come to give their view. Here too, the president has his supporters. A steady trickle of locals makes its way to the ballot box.
We voted for our president.
And why?
We voted for him because our salaries are good. And he can take it easy now.
He did good things for the country, especially for us, the poor. He has helped us a lot. He has opened health centers, and they've dug for oil. and build the Kandaji Dam and the second Niger bridge.
But outside the polling station, the streets are quiet. Very quiet. It is mainly the children who ventured out today. Next day in Niamey, it's the morning after a long night. Still, the police are keeping watch. All night, the ballots from all over this vast country have been coming into the Palais des Congrès. Inside, the counting is painstakingly slow. Early indications point to a large yes vote and a massive turnout. The final tally is several days away, but the result increasingly clear, and the news already out. All over Niamey, thank you billboards have sprouted up, just a little too quickly. Further proof, say the independent newspapers, that it was all a fix-up. At its headquarters, the opposition gathers to give another version of the results, in particular, a voter turnout.
The people of Niger have said no. They've rejected the poll because turnout was, according to all our information, below 5%. So President Tandja has failed spectacularly and should draw the right conclusions and resign. We have the people with us, as you've noticed. And fortunately, President Tandja could not dissolve the people.
Back in Niamey's little market, the remains of the previous day are being swept away. Little obvious sign here of the political revolution carried out in the name of the people. Trading has resumed, life much as it ever was. But beneath the appearances, this is a country still divided.
Our president does a good job. In all our history, we've never had a president who worked so hard for the people.
I think it was anti-constitutional. It's not normal. They say the people are with them, but we saw. You, the journalists, you went to the polling stations. You saw with your own eyes that the people are not with them.
It's the will of the people, so we must submit.
But the submission is to a president in whose hands the power is now absolute over the people who first gave it to him in an election 10 years ago. And yet, President Tandja knows that his regime is being watched by the outside world. More than half of his state budget depends on it. An outside world already threatening to turn its back and its money away from Niger, which 10 years after the arrival of President Tandja to power remains one of the poorest countries in the world.
Well, joining me in the studio now is one of the reporters behind that story, Melissa Bell. Melissa, tell us, throughout that time, what was it like on the streets? Was there a real sense that something very important, very political was happening?
It was quite odd in the run-up to it, in the days that led up to the referendum itself. You had this really quite tense sort of atmosphere where the opposition were saying that they would do everything they could to prevent this poll from taking place, all kinds of disguised threats of some kind of trouble. It felt like a crisis. It felt very tense. And then when the poll itself came, of course, you have to understand that no chance had been taken. There were military absolutely everywhere, and the city had essentially been locked down. But really, even outside it, people mostly chose to stay indoors, and it was really calm, and it all happened absolutely in the greatest of calms, in the most unexpected way. And when you spoke to people, there was this sort of fatalism, this idea that, well, this was going to happen, and there was very little that they could do. And it was quite odd, the sort of general indifference that it seemed to take place on the day itself. And when you consider what was at stake, that already so many of these democratic institutions had been brushed aside, and that the constitution itself changes so drastically the way power is shared by the leaders in Niger, it's surprising that it should have been done almost so easily. Because when you look at the constitution itself, it's very easy to focus on the fact that he's giving himself more time. Far more important and far more troubling is that he's also giving himself extraordinary new powers. So, of course, he'll be president for another 3 years and possibly beyond. But also, out of 160 articles, one was devoted to the prime minister, who now becomes a sort of coordinator of governmental action. Everything else is to do with making President Tandja even more powerful. And indeed, there are no checks and balances. Any kind of system of checks and balances has completely disappeared. So it's very difficult to imagine how Niger will ever get back to any kind of democratic political model. It's very hard to see how that can now happen.
Well, as you say, I mean, if it's hard to see how that can happen, what now? The opposition obviously furious, but if there are no checks and balances, what's the future?
The opposition are rather hoping that the outside world is going to take notice. And it's true that Niger does depend for more than half of its state budget on foreign aid. It's very dependent on it. But in a sense, and there have been threats from the European Union and countries that do contribute to Niger's budget. But one of the strengths that President Tandja has, and perhaps one of the reasons for which he felt that he could act with such impunity, is that he has the support of countries like China, with whom he's just signed a 3.5 billion euro contract to build an oil refinery and to carry on looking for oil in the desert. And of course, the contract that was signed earlier this year with Areva, the French nuclear giant, for more than a billion euros. So he is protected by very strong economic interests in this otherwise terribly poor country. So it's one of those situations where one hopes that at some point pressure will be brought to bear from the outside in a way that it couldn't be brought to bear from the inside.
Just very briefly, because we're nearly running out of time, but it's not the first time we've seen a West African leader holding on to power in this way.
No, it's not the first time. And of course, what you've seen a great deal of in West Africa at the moment is a lot of difficult transitions, some violent, some just anti-constitutional, where you realize how fragile really democracy is. And of course, one of the problems is that just as democracy there can be a contagious sort of effect, it's opposite also. So that, or recently in Burkina Faso, the party who's in power at its annual sort of party conference was looking at a text that would allow it to see how it could remove limits to presidential mandates. And you can see how when one democratic regime falls or changes, that can really have quite a big effect on the countries around it.
Melissa Bell, thank you very much indeed for that fascinating look at Niger. Well, that's all we have time for this week for Reporters, but do join us next week for another fascinating report.